Good morning, Chicago. Today is November 30th, 2021. I'm Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner at the Chicago Department of Public Health. And as always, we are here answering your COVID questions live. You can put your questions directly into the box below on Facebook or Twitter. You can also use the hashtag AskDrArwady. There's a lot to talk about. I was off all last week for Thanksgiving. I hope you all had a good and as COVID safe as possible Thanksgiving. I actually was traveling during that time, and I can talk about that if you're interested. It was interesting. But we have a lot of local data to get to, and then a ton of Omicron questions coming in. So I've pulled together a few things primarily focused on Omicron and our local situation, and then we'll get to your questions. So as always, we'll start with our dashboard. CHI.gov/COVID- is where you can see the latest on COVID numbers for the city of Chicago. And you can see here, it's interesting because it looks like things are getting a little better, but some of that is because of the Thanksgiving holiday. We saw the exact same thing last year, and I'll show that to you. We were averaging just a few days ago over 600 cases a day. Right now, we're down under 500, largely because of the decreased testing with the holidays. With that, we then see our positivity go up. We saw the same thing last year. So we're at 3.5% positivity, up from 3%. And I encourage you to explore that some more. Let me pull up the slides here just quickly. Here. So in terms of where this puts us from a numbers perspective, sorry, slideshow from the beginning. Okay. So we are currently still in a high transmission setting for cases diagnosed per day, although that has decreased a little bit due to the holiday testing patterns. We remain quite good in terms of our positivity. That means we're doing enough testing at 3.5%. Hospital beds, we are in that substantial transmission or substantial risk category, averaging 300 Chicagoans hospitalized, not in the ICU with COVID right now. And ICU, we're averaging 86 Chicagoans with COVID. This is just showing the same pattern of what happened last year. If you look, you see we were having the big peak, and we were starting to come down already from the very high peak, but we saw this big dip and then an increase back again just following the Thanksgiving holidays of 2020, and then in purple just following the Christmas holidays. And I absolutely expect that we will see the same thing here. So we were averaging 613 cases just a little bit ago. We're averaging 493, and we will have a better sense of this probably about a week from now to see where we are. You see that same pattern with the test positivity last year, and we'll probably see something similar. We did last week while I was out technically hit the 77% of eligible Chicagoans ages 12 and up having received at least one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. That, of course, reflects our 77 community areas. Really an exciting landmark to hit, but there is still more work to do. This week, we're now at 77.2% of 12 years plus that have gotten a first dose. The milestones for this week, I want to give congrats to Roseland that hit 60% of that 12 plus population. Chicago Lawn that hit the magic 77 number. The near west side, which hit 80%, and West Lawn down in the southwest hit 90% of eligible 12 plus residents getting at least their first dose. So congrats to all of them. And in terms of where we are on the completed vaccine series, we're at 70.9%. So we'll need to see that keep moving up. It's not as high as it should be, particularly with this variant potentially on the rise internationally. Uptake among our 5 to 11-year-olds continues to go up. We're up to almost a quarter of Chicago's 5 to 11-year-olds have had a first dose. And we just had a few days where the very first 5 to 11-year-olds are getting their second dose. We'll be doing more of that certainly this coming weekend. You can get your child vaccine at hundreds of places across the city. Specifically this weekend, the city, again, is at Richard J. Daley College on Saturday and Wilbur Wright College on Sunday. We'll be doing second doses for the kids who got their vaccines their first dose is 3 weeks ago. We also have Protect Chicago at Home. There's been a lot of uptake with that, which is good, but we're adding some capability, and we will be making weekend appointments available starting next week will be the first week that we'll be doing 7 days, so that is good. And just, I've been saying this, but getting vaccinated now in time for the holidays. Really, J&J is your one bet to have had to be fully vaccinated in time for Christmas, Kwanzaa, or New Year's Eve at this point, December 11th. But if you decide to get one of the other vaccines, it's just important to at least get started on that. All right, let's talk Omicron. I know you all have been reading a lot, sending questions. It's been the main thing I've been answering every kind of question about. So I figured we would just talk through high level what we do know about this new variant. So first of all, this timeline of detection is pretty remarkable. This highlights that the world has come a long way, and actually the US has come a long way too, in terms of our ability to detect these new variants. And I really want to give huge congratulations and thanks to the scientists in South Africa who were quick to identify this, very transparent about it, and worked quickly to make sure that the world was aware. For those who don't know, I actually lived in Botswana and have spent a lot of time in South Africa as well, and it's a part of the world that I really like, and I really like the scientists and the doctors who work there. So in any case, November 11 to 14, so just 2 weeks ago, is when specimens were collected in both Botswana and South Africa that were later identified as this Omicron variant. And then November 23 is when the new variant was really discovered in terms of this testing in South Africa. And then November 24, there were the first news reports that there had been not just one, but multiple examples of this found in Botswana, found in China, in a traveler from South Africa. And again, this is from sequences in the database, because as I've been reminding you for months now, every single time a virus gets its genetic fingerprint taken, that's not from just a regular COVID test. That's special testing that's done to look for variants. Those get uploaded into a database that is shared worldwide so that you can quickly see how the virus may be changing. And so November 26, less than 2 weeks after those first specimens were collected, it was designated as a variant of concern by the WHO. And then as of yesterday, it had already been detected in Africa, Asia, Australasia, Europe, and North America. These are the countries where it has been detected. There's clearly been local transmission in South Africa and Botswana, possibly some in Britain, et cetera. We've not technically detected an Omicron here in the US. I would be very surprised if there is not already some Omicron here, and I would expect that we would see some cases likely detected in the days or weeks to come. So first, I wanted to just give a little bit of a review about how viruses replicate. People have been asking me, why do these mutations matter? So viruses work via evolution, just like humans, animals do, but they work on a very quick time cycle. They replicate, they copy themselves, and that is what leads to mutations. So viruses can't survive without a host. So in this case, the host is you, the host is humans. They have to use human or animal cells to copy themselves. And once a virus enters a human, it starts copying itself right away, millions of times. And the human immune system works to fight off the virus, but not until those copies get made. The virus is looking for opportunities to live on, to reproduce and to spread, just like any other living organism. So a mutation is a copying error. It's a random error in the virus's genetic code that can be introduced when the virus copies itself. So the genetic fingerprint, just to remind you, it's made up of what are called base pairs, and that in turn is what tells your body how to make proteins, amino acids, which then become proteins. And in all of these millions of copies, you can get these little changes. Most of the time, those changes don't really make a big difference. But the more virus that is circulating in any population, the more the virus itself can change. So we always have these little mutations appearing. Most of the time, they don't really matter. But if a mutation makes it more likely that a virus is going to survive or be able to replicate, copy itself, that version might outcompete versions of the virus that don't have that mutation. That version has a survival advantage from an evolutionary perspective. And so where the virus is able to have some patterns of mutation that make it less likely to be destroyed by the immune system, that make it more able to evade treatments or vaccines, that is when we have concern. And so there are 3 levels that we use to label a certain pattern of mutations. So first, if we've seen a pattern of mutations showing up multiple times, meaning that it's outcompeting, it's there more than once, it's not just random. Scientists label that a variant of interest. That literally just means this is interesting. We should watch this. We're seeing this variant in a few different places. Maybe it means something from a public health perspective. Maybe it doesn't. So there are variants of interest that are detected all the time. And then where we get particularly concerned is if there is this repeated transmission of a certain pattern of mutations that is concerning from a public health standpoint. So that's when we call it a variant of concern. Delta, for example, is a variant of concern. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and now Omicron have been labeled variants of concern by the WHO. And so why does something become a variant of concern? Maybe the version of the virus is more contagious. Maybe it's more able to evade our immune system, whether our immune system learned its lesson from prior infection or from vaccine. Maybe it makes us sicker. Maybe it makes our treatments less likely to work. Any of those things, it gets labeled a variant of concern. So the scientific community is really worried about Omicron, and so it right away, WHO named it a variant of concern. More typically, we would see a variant be labeled a variant of interest first. You watch it, you see what happens, but I'm going to show you why there has been some more concern. That said, it is not labeled at this point a variant of high consequence, which is the 3rd level. So if you have repeated transmission that's highly concerning, that would be a variant of high consequence. We have not had one of those yet. There's some concern. Could that be Omicron? It could. It's going to take a couple of weeks to really learn how well the vaccines are protecting. We expect that they continue to protect, but probably not quite as well. There's a lot of epidemiologic studies that are doing, but it's important that people recognize, yes, we're concerned about this, but this is not, the sky is not falling at this point, and we'll know more in the next couple of weeks. But where you should be more concerned is if you hear that this variant does get reclassified a variant of high consequence. That would mean really the vaccines aren't working, or there's something very different about the way this variant is behaving. So why is the concern? Now we're getting into a little bit of science here. I've got some links to show you. There are a large number of mutations in this variant. So if you look back, the Delta variant, maybe had a dozen mutations. Don't quote me on that number, but there's this one has 50 mutations, meaning 50 changes in the genetic code, and 32 just in the spike protein itself. So remember the spike, that's why it's called coronavirus. It's that picture that looks like a crown, those little, and the pictures they show them as red sticking out. That spike is the important part of how the virus interacts with the human immune system. And so where we see a lot of changes in the spike, it means that it might be changes that lets the virus get into our cells more easily, or have our immune system not recognize it as well and fight it off. So specifically, there's 30 changes in amino acids. There's 3 little parts where the genetic code is deleted. There's 1 little insertion. And this is the most number of mutations that has been detected at this point in any variant. And then some of the changes that we're seeing in the spike protein, we have previously seen them in variants that went along with increased transmissibility, meaning more contagious, or immune escape, meaning the more likely to see breakthrough infections after vaccination, and more likely to see reinfections after someone has recovered. And so the genetic code itself is actually giving us a concern here. And I'm going to see if I can click on this, yes, and open this up. So this is just a page that kind of shows this graphically. Let me see if we can get this to load here. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, so sorry, slight technical difficulty here. But I do want to show this to you if I can get this to work. I don't know. I have lost my mouse for some reason. Okay. You know what? Never mind. Oh, there we go. Okay, apologies about that. So I do want to show this to you though, because I think it makes good sense. So each of these lines here shows a different variant. So the alpha variant, the beta variant, the delta variant, and then here's Omicron in the middle. Each of these little lines is a mutation. So like if you hover over it, it'll give you the specifics. This is a mutation of the amino acid at position 614. It's in the spike protein, and this was the change. You don't need to know the details. What you should see though is that like this first mutation has been seen across every variant of concern and some of these variants of interest on the right, including Omicron. And if you look, Omicron, see how it has so many of the same mutations that we've seen in the variants already that were of concern. So, it has both of it has these from Delta, it has these that we were seeing in Alpha, it has these that were seen in Beta. And if you look, it's got not only so many shared mutations, but then it has right here, this is Omicron in the middle, all of these other mutations, many of which have not really been seen in other variants. And so the concern is this is so mutated that it has some potential to be to be concerning and to have changed quite a bit. And that's what the scientists are really working on. And so if we come back here and, sorry, slideshow. Okay, so here's why we're concerned. So this is showing you from South Africa how quickly the variant was outcompeting the other variants. So this shows in green the beta variant, and in blue the delta variant, and in red the what is now called the Omicron variant. And you can see that like the beta variant there, it took about 100 days before it was even half of the variants that were being sequenced in South Africa. Delta, it took about 100 days to get to a point where 80 or 90% of the variants in South Africa were the Delta variant. But the Omicron here, you can see it only took about 12 days, and they're already at a point where 90% of what they're detecting is this Omicron variant. So it's out, it seems to be at least there, out-competing the Delta variant, out-competing the Beta variant, and very quickly. So it is probably more infectious, more contagious than Delta. That's part of why we're worried. And if you look at the same way, the laboratory evidence here again is showing sort of by date, this is in South Africa specifically, that it took quite a while to get up to a point in green here where almost everything was beta, and then it took quite a while to get up to where everything was delta. And then you see how quickly this blue, that's Omicron, has been shooting up. So it definitely, at least in that setting, is outcompeting, or appears to be, the other variants. And the scientists are really doing still the studies to look at, is it making people sicker? Is it putting people in the hospital? Is there something else going on that's different in this setting? And then importantly, testing the vaccines to see how much more breakthrough may be expected. Certainly we would expect the vaccines to continue to have some level of protection, but this is where boosters become particularly important. Here's just some more data you can look at. So in terms of, this is from my lab folks here at CDPH. I've had both of the leaders on, Massimo Pacilli and Dr. Isaac Ganai have both been on, and we'll probably have them on again in the next couple weeks to talk about this. But in terms of why we're worried about this, does it look like this variant is more transmissible, like more contagious? It's likely, based on the pattern that we've seen in South Africa. We don't know that yet. It's still being looked at, but that one does look likely. Is there more immune escape, meaning that humans are less likely to be fully protected as a result of vaccination, or of prior infection. And this is also likely, but it is definitely still being investigated. And it's going to take a couple of weeks to have the answers to some of that, just based on how long it takes to do these studies. You can't hurry them up. This is partly because it does have the most mutations that we've seen so far, and it's got some of the mutations that we know are concerning. It's important, though, that people hear some protection against severe disease is still very, very likely. We're still looking not just at the antibodies, but at the T cell response, which is another part of the immune system. So I don't want people to think, oh my God, vaccines aren't working. No, that's not what we're saying here. But we're saying that with this potential new variant, we could be seeing some more breakthroughs, and we could be seeing some more people getting COVID again, even if they had COVID in the past. What about treatments? Are the treatments less effective? Maybe. The monoclonal antibodies, which again are sort of our way of trying to passively give someone the immune protection that they could have had through vaccination or they could have had through infection themselves previously, those could need to be retargeted or remade. But some good news is that the upcoming antiviral medications, which I talked about the last time I was on, they're not approved yet, but I'm really excited. You know, Pfizer's got this medication that looks like it really cuts the risk of hospitalization or death if someone is infected with COVID, and it's a pill as opposed to the infusion. So not approved yet, still being studied, but we would not expect the way that those pills work to be affected by this variant, because those pills affect the enzymes, like the replication of the virus, not the way antibodies do. Does it cause more severe disease? This is also still really unclear. We don't have any evidence that it does. Early cases in South Africa have been among the young. They've been relatively mild. There are some increasing hospitalizations in South Africa, but that's maybe just because cases are going up, not that the variant is different. So this is some of what the epidemiologists are looking at. And then finally, do we have concern about less sensitive diagnosis, that the test wouldn't work as well? And no, not really at this point. It's possible some of the PCR assays could be a little bit less sensitive, but that's likely to not really be an issue. Most of them, and certainly the ones we use here in the US, tend to really look for multi-targets, meaning they look for all different parts of the genome. There could be a theoretical risk to the antigen test, but the initial results we've seen are not concerning. So really the larger concerns right now are about the transmissibility, which is what we saw with Delta, and then maybe around this immune escape. And that's what we'll have much more information about in the days to come. So there's been a lot of international policy response. Poland banned flights. They've been extending quarantine patterns for travelers. Japan and some others have completely shut its borders again to all international travelers. The Netherlands went back into a lockdown, or a partial lockdown, barring spectators from sporting events, closing restaurants early. They're doing that for 3 weeks. And nationally here, yesterday, the U.S. announced travel restrictions from these 8 countries. We may see some increased testing and quarantine requirements for all international travelers, potentially in the days or weeks to come here, I think, as we learn more. And locally, we are certainly, we're actually quite well set up here, way more than we were. I mean, a year ago, we had very limited capacity to do this kind of genetic sequencing, but we've been using funding from CDC to build that capacity. I've had folks on here talking about it before, but we have something called the Regional Innovative Public Health Laboratory, or RIPPLE, which is a partnership with Rush University, but then samples are collected from all across the city, a variety of hospitals. They reflect Chicago in terms of demographics, locations across the city, how the COVID virus is showing up, and we take a sample of those, a random sample of those, to test for surveillance testing. And then in addition, if there's outbreaks, if there's breakthrough infections, if we're seeing people have an unusual presentation, we may do a genetic sequence in that setting too. So we're increasing our sampling, asking some of these hospital settings to be sending in twice as many samples for a bit here, and that's happening all over the country. Really, the U.S. has come a long way. They can detect all the way down to it's either 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000, I'll double check it, of if say 1 in 1,000 cases is one of these variants, you would detect it with this. We're also doing some extra things in the laboratory. And then we're really increasing our local wastewater sampling too for COVID. And I don't know, we haven't talked as much about wastewater sampling recently, but it's a really good public health strategy that doesn't depend on an individual to go and get tested. You're literally collecting from the sewer system because if you have COVID, there is COVID virus that you can find in your poop. And it is not contagious in the same way, but you can do some sampling of this. And it's helpful to be able to say, at a neighborhood level, at a specific area within, depending where you sample, within a city or even potentially within a facility, are we seeing a virus? Are we seeing a variant of a virus? Do we need to increase testing, et cetera? And so this has been growing. There's a lot of partners involved in it. The state obviously has been doing genetic sequencing all along and has been investing in this wastewater investment. There's multiple academic partners. University of Illinois at Chicago is the lead. And then Argonne National Lab, for example, is working on some of the primers. And so, they expect to be able to be checking for Omicron really even this week. And we already are working on being able to test sort of across the city. A lot of this is still in its relative infancy, but we've been able to test at Cook County Jail, for example. And you can see, are there parts of the jail where there may be a case? You want to act very quickly in that setting and be doing extra testing. And we're going to probably add local wastewater sampling at O'Hare too, really looking for some of this among international travelers. So there's lots to do. In terms of next steps, we really are very well placed here in Chicago to be able to detect Omicron. We likely will detect it soon. The question is not, can we detect it? The question is, what is our response? And, I'm a broken record on this, but vaccinating is by far the most important thing. Boosters, also important. As a reminder, all Chicagoans now, all Americans 18 and over, are eligible for and are recommended to get a booster 6 months after completing your Pfizer or Moderna series, or 2 months after getting your J&J series. And that again helps boost some of the antibodies. Is it possible down the line we could need another booster to help protect against Omicron? It's possible. I don't know yet. But right now, the boosters that are available, we know are important in terms of helping to prevent severe illness, hospitalization, breakthrough infections, and with cases on the rise, even outside of the Omicron variant, strongly encourage all Chicagoans to get that booster. They remain free, widely available. You can call 312-746-4835, as always, if you need help getting a first dose, second dose, or a booster. Keep masking indoors, and then obviously staying home if you're sick, hand washing, etc. So that was a lot, but I wanted to really talk through a lot of the questions that we'd been getting and see what else you've got here. Okay, so I see Aaron Hoffman asking about our COVID tests being evaluated for Omicron in Chicago across the U.S. Definitely, and that is even ramping up. Kristen Korkowski on Facebook, if I'm boosted, should I be worried about the new variant? So I think if you're boosted and you're masking indoors, you're in public spaces, you're doing everything that you can to be as protected as possible as you can be. I am not personally hugely concerned about this variant for myself as someone who is fully vaccinated and boosted and takes precautions. I am worried at a population level, certainly, about this new variant, and I don't know for sure what the future will hold here, but I am pleased that the technology exists, that if the vaccine does need to be modified, that can be done relatively quickly, just in a matter of probably 2 to 3 months. And I am also I'm worried always about the people who are not vaccinated at all, because those are the folks who are the most likely always to be having the severe outcomes and to be getting COVID and spreading COVID. And, my worry is that part of the reason this variant emerges is that there are parts of the world, including in Southern Africa, where there just has not been enough vaccine availability. And here we've got plenty of vaccine, plenty for boosters, but we still have people sometimes deciding not to get it. All right, Joanne DeAngelo on Facebook says, I can't get in to get the booster. Every website crashes for every pharmacy. Can you just walk in? This is ridiculous. Sorry you're having trouble. Please call our hotline, 312-746-4835, and they will help you get a vaccine, help you get sorted, figure out whatever is going on for you there. So also vaccines.gov is the nationwide where you can look and you can put in your zip code and see who has what vaccine, and there's links there. So as a reminder, there are about 700 places across the city of Chicago that have vaccines available. So please do call the hotline and we will help you. Mario Vega from Facebook. My wife is pregnant. Should she get the booster? Yes, she should get the booster. My cousin just gave birth over the Thanksgiving weekend, so congratulations and welcome. And she and I have been in very close communications really throughout about COVID vaccines, about COVID boosters, and I strongly encouraged her to get the booster during pregnancy, and she did. And the reason to do that, there's a couple reasons to do that. One is that it helps protect the baby. So when you are vaccinated and boosted, you can pass on some of that quote natural immunity to the infant. The baby is going to be too young to be vaccinated, especially in those first 6 months. Any protection that it has, not just from COVID, but from any disease, is going to be based on the antibodies and the protection that it gets from mom. And so for the same reason we very strongly want pregnant women to be getting flu shots is because in the same way they can pass that immunity to the unborn baby. So that is the number one reason. The number two reason is that pregnant women's immune systems change by definition. You are more vulnerable actually to infections, to getting more seriously ill. And so we definitely want pregnant women to get vaccinated and to get boosted, because in case you did get COVID, you're more likely to get seriously ill. And we have seen no issues with bad fetal outcomes, meaning birth problems for vaccine, but we have seen lots of bad birth outcomes for women who give birth while they're infected with COVID or who get sick themselves. So yes, I would definitely recommend it. And again, that's the advice I give my own family. All right, Laura Dombrowski from Facebook. Are children safe in schools due to the Omicron variant? So as a reminder, the way that this variant is transmitted is not any different from the way that the other variants are transmitted. It is still coronavirus. And so there has to be someone who has COVID, who is in a setting and is in a close contact, and you're able to basically, you're breathing in somebody else's germs, to put it in the most basic level. So what we've seen consistently, not just in schools but around the world, is that in settings where we take COVID seriously, where people get vaccinated, first and foremost, the most important, and then secondly, where you're masking and hand washing and distancing where you can, those are not the settings where we broadly see widespread transmission. So I don't have any concern right now about schools, and certainly, we'll be keeping an eye on this. We'll see where it goes, but I remain very confident that these vaccines are protective in the most important spaces. And so if your child is vaccinated, I would not have a high level of concern. If your child is not vaccinated, please get them vaccinated. It's important not just for you and your family, but to help us stop this transmission of variants and development of variants, because variants develop when the virus moves from person to person. And so that's why we got to get vaccine around the world. Was mass vaccination responsible, this is Justin from Facebook, was the mass vaccination possibly responsible for this variant mutating the S protein as much as it has? No. Probably not. More likely, the reason we're seeing this, it's not uncommon to see mutations in the area where a virus connects to the host. And actually, most likely where this is coming from, at least the original sort of spike mutations, is just from natural infection. That if there's the ability for the virus to get into a cell more easily, makes it harder for the immune system to, to push it off. We saw that happening before vaccines were even available, right? Like if you look at the Alpha variant, for example. So it is not at all that vaccination is driving the mutations. There's a theory that there may be, especially in people who are more severely immunocompromised, like if you think about this, when you get infected with a virus, any virus, not just COVID, right away it sort of sets off a fight between the virus and your own immune system. If your immune system already knows the lesson of how to fight off the virus, it can fight it off without really giving it a chance to replicate or copy or transmit. If you have never seen that virus before, though, so you haven't been vaccinated, you've never even been infected, you've never seen it at all, that virus gets like every chance in your body to replicate, to copy, to change, to grow. And the issue is that in most people, thank goodness, your immune system does okay, right? You get sick, but 10 days later, you've managed to fight it off, you've won, and the virus is no longer affecting you directly in most cases. However, the virus has been trying to mutate, has been trying to evolve and has been trying to spread that whole time. And so it continues to live if it has the chance to spread. So one of the reasons for vaccine is that it stops the virus from even having the opportunity to start that replication process and then stop the transmission process. But the concern, and one of the theories around how so many of these mutations have been found in this variant, is it's possible that in people who are severely immunocompromised, remember how we've talked about if there are people who have active cancer or chemotherapy or they're taking medications to really, really decrease their immune response, because you have to do that for chemotherapy, or people who may have untreated HIV/AIDS, and their immune system can't really fight off a virus very well. Instead of that being a 10-day fight or so between your immune system and the virus may have the potential to live for a much, much longer time in someone with a really weaker immune system, and can have the potential to keep copying, keep changing, and get exposed. And so, we don't know this. I want to be clear about that. But there is some theory, in Southern Africa, there's still a really big problem with HIV and with untreated HIV, where people have not been able to access medications, and a lot of problems with people with lower immune systems. And is it possible that somebody, with an immune system issue, whether it's HIV or not, this is not for people who are on treatment. This would be for people who are not on HIV treatment. If they, if the virus is in them for a long, long, long time, it has more opportunity to mutate. So that's one of the theories. But no, there's not a theory that vaccination in any way would cause these kinds of mutations. It's really more of the natural pressures. Kathy Powers from Facebook. Why do we have to pay for home testing kits? Does COVID relief money pay for them? So it depends a little bit the setting that you're in. There are some parts of the city where, particularly that are lower income or where we're seeing a lot of COVID surging, that some of our door-to-door ambassadors, some of our outreach, we have been distributing more of those at-home type tests, but I will tell you, the demand for those is very, very high. Even when the health department orders them, it takes a number of weeks because of supply chain issues to be able to get them right now. And so the government has been working, the federal government has been working to really bring the cost of these down. I'm really excited for the day when we can get these home testing kits. I mean, they're already pretty cheap. They're 2 for $20-something typically at the pharmacies. And there is the ability, of course, you can get a COVID test without cost, particularly if you're going to some of the pharmacies, et cetera. There's a whole program around that. But for people who are able to afford it, you can use your copay, or not your copay, your FSA, your health savings account, your HSA, other ways to do it. And no, we couldn't actually get more of the CDPH can't get more of those home test kits, even if we wanted them. And we do prioritize them for settings where there are outbreaks where we need to be doing more specific investigation. So there is widespread testing available, but the at-home rapid most convenient tests still, at least in the US, are something that broadly you do need to purchase. Okay, so a question here from Laura Catherine on Facebook. A friend has reactions, hive and rash to PEG in products, which is polyethylated glycol. She's never had anaphylactic shock. She doesn't want to get vaccinated due to fear of this. Is it valid? Is the danger more than the danger due to getting COVID? She's in Upper Michigan, yeah, where numbers are high and she's 64. So I would encourage her certainly to talk to her doctor about this if she has not. If it were me and she's never had anaphylactic shock, I would be getting a vaccine. I will just tell you that. However, I would be getting a vaccine at a setting where they know that I have that allergy or that I've had that prior reaction in case I were to need treatment for the allergy. So I, of course, don't know all of her details or what the testing that has been done, but there has been some work to even desensitize. And so I would encourage her to talk to an allergist, immunologist, and get his or her advice. Personally, if I were living in Michigan right now and I were 64, I would very much want a COVID vaccine, as long as I was in a setting where I had talked to someone who I felt was confident about my history and sort of, could advise me on that. So that's my personal opinion, but she should, of course, talk to her doctor, and I would recommend specifically an allergist. All right, Patty Graff on Facebook. Will holiday family situations be more risky with Omicron on the horizon? Should unvaccinated family members and the vaccinated people they live with attend? Yeah. So I don't know the full answer to that. We don't know how widespread the Omicron variant is likely to become. Based on what we saw in South Africa, I would be very surprised if we did not see Omicron here get detected here very, very shortly, if not already. And I would expect to probably see it outcompete Delta. Now, it may not. But regardless, even without Omicron, we remain at that high-risk status. Cases are up. And I am worried. I talked about this before Thanksgiving, that it's really unvaccinated that do have the highest risk of being infected and then in turn potentially passing it on. So if people have recovered from COVID and gotten a vaccine, they are the best protected of anybody out there. Next, people who are fully vaccinated. Next, people who recovered from COVID in the past but are not vaccinated. And lowest, people who have neither recovered from COVID nor been vaccinated. But my worry, especially in that group of people who say, oh, I had COVID in the past and I don't need to get vaccinated, is that if that was a while ago, this virus has mutated and changed a long time since then. And I would not be, we're seeing more of these breakthroughs from the vaccine, but we're also seeing more reinfections of people with a natural infection. And so, strongly just encourage people to get vaccinated. It's the most important tool that we have right now. And certainly I'm excited for hopefully some of these new treatments, even in December, but it's the most important thing. And so I don't gather for holidays, et cetera, with anybody who is age eligible and is not fully vaccinated. That's just the decision that I have made for myself. Where there are young children in my extended family, I am okay with them being part of the celebration because I know their parents, their families are vaccinated and they've been being careful with COVID. No such thing as a risk-free setting. But for me, that is really where I have drawn that line. And I can't make those decisions for you. I obviously, we control public spaces, but it is the private spaces that we see the most transmission in because that's when people let their guard down. And so that's what I would recommend. Justin says, don't most mutations eventually down throttle to be less lethal, as Omicron is preliminary showing? Yeah, so I wouldn't say Omicron is preliminary showing that just yet. Like we're looking at that. So that's where I was saying they've seen this big increase in cases. A number of them were in younger people, some of whom previously had COVID, some of whom had never had COVID, some of whom had been vaccinated, true breakthroughs. And so they're looking at all of this as well as severity. And, the problem is that evolution can go both directions, clearly. And we've seen, you look at the Ebola virus, for example, it has in no way, down mutated to be less lethal. And all viruses don't have the same time frame either. That's the other thing. Like influenza is a very, very quickly mutating virus. COVID, we think, is a little bit slower than that, although this particular variant has shown that in some settings it actually can mutate more quickly. But I think that I would not at all make an assumption that mutations down throttle automatically to be less lethal. They're evolutionary, right? Just like our evolution is, just on different time frames. But we'll learn more. Face State from Facebook. Have there been any estimates of incubation period? So not yet. I would guess that this will be kind of like Delta, which is the main thing when it was, one of the reasons it was so much more contagious was that you didn't need to have as much exposure to the virus to get infected. And we saw that incubation period shorten a little bit. So we were more commonly seeing people just 3-4 days out as opposed to the 5 to 7 days out. I would guess this would be on that same faster side, but we don't know yet. And this is what, there's a lot of epidemiologists working on the data, especially from Southern Africa right now, but also looking around the world, not just to detect it, but to understand where it's been seen, how has it been behaving. That is paired with all of the laboratory work that's being done to look at, to understand these mutations more. Where are they? How, where have they come from? How have they changed? And then importantly, on the vaccine side, the scientists are testing right now all of the existing vaccines against the variant. They are also testing what's called convalescent sera, meaning blood from people who have recovered from COVID. They're testing that against the Omicron variant. And all of that, it just takes a couple of weeks in terms of incubation periods, if you will, how long it takes to get some of this done. But we are in a way better place than we were a year ago, certainly, when we didn't have a vaccine at all yet, and just as we were starting to ramp up, I'm really confident that if it is necessary and there needed to be another version of a booster, the companies are saying probably within just 3 months or so, they could make that tweak and make it available. I hope we don't have to do that, and I'm not saying that we will have to do that, but I'm confident that the tech has come a long way in terms of both detection and and response. But it's really about what do we do here. I was traveling over the holidays, and I was somewhere where everybody virtually was vaccinated and everybody was still wearing masks, and it was well, why wouldn't we? We're in a pandemic setting, and it was just interesting to see. All right. Okay. We're basically at time here. If we did not get to your question, I will come back and try to get them on Thursday. I see there's some questions about mask requirements. We'll see what happens with this variant. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more mask requirements in place, but more to come. Not we have it in place here because we're at high risk setting, just like the CDC recommends. All right. So I hope that this was helpful for you. Thanks for people putting in the friendly comments. We will be back on Thursday. Send in other questions that you have. We'll keep you up to date. Really, get vaccinated. Get boosted. Have everybody get boosted, especially if they're older. And keep doing the things that have gotten us this far. I want us to stay open if we possibly can. And staying open means staying as safe as possible. And that means, first and foremost, vaccine. Thanks.